The lawyer for the family of Nolan Wells reveals new evidence in their investigation into how he died.
30 days. That is what the family's attorney says a grand jury review could be, per Mississippi Public Broadcasting. And the district attorney has now said what she intends to put in front of it: a thorough investigation, presented to a grand jury, per ABC News. That is the clock that actually matters in this case. No public statement from the president about it appears in the record. What exists in Washington is a letter and a review. Here is what is officially known about that afternoon, per the record. Nolan Wells, 18 years old, went on a boat trip to Horn Island, Mississippi, on the 4th of July, according to CNN and Locks. He disappeared during that trip. His body was recovered on the 6th. The last independently verified sighting of Nolan Wells happened somewhere between 3:23 and 4:27 in the afternoon. That window comes from the United Cajun Navy's report, per TMZ. That is a volunteer search organization's document, not an official finding. GPS data from the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, obtained by CBS News, shows the boat left Horn Island at approximately 4:31 p.m., so the official record gives you a sighting window that closes at 4:27 and a boat departure at 4:31. That is a 4-minute gap at the most. But the window opened at 3:23. That is over an hour. Between the last moment someone independently confirms seeing Nolan Wells and the moment the boat leaves the island, there is a span of anywhere from 4 minutes to 68 minutes. That is the range. That is what the record holds. The sheriff's department says the boat trip itself is where the official story begins to firm up. According to Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter, per the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, his office has interviewed more than 60 witnesses. He also said the FBI is assisting with digital evidence because Horn Island is on federal land. The 3 friends who were on the boat have been interviewed. That is confirmed by the sheriff's office, per Locks. Now, here is a number that has not moved. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan Wells' death. That is per CNN, NPR, and NOLA.com. There is an official state autopsy. It was completed by July 31st. Per Well BT. Its results have not been made public. They are going to a grand jury. And the family's independent autopsy, per ABC News and CNN, returned a cause and manner of death of undetermined pending investigation. Undetermined. So what the grand jury will see is a timeline with a hole in it. A sighting that stops somewhere between 3:23 and 4:27. A boat that leaves at 4:31. And an official cause of death that has not been released. The district attorney has said what she will present, a thorough investigation, but she has also said what she will not do. Per ABC News, she pushed back against public pressure to release information. She said that if she were to fill that void and share information publicly, she would be stepping outside the bounds of the law. So the public has a window, the officials have a wall, and the grand jury has a question. And that is the exact moment the Washington clock starts ticking differently. Because that is when the letter arrives, and the review begins. That gap is the center of this case now. Not the boat, not the island, not even the autopsies. A span of time nobody has accounted for in public. If that span had an account, the case would be closer to an answer. Without one, it is a question. And everything else in this case is orbiting that silence. Start with the only official theory on the record. According to Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter, per the Jackson County Sheriff's Department, there were no signs of foul play. He suspected drowning. 2 words. Suspected drowning. Not confirmed. Not established. A suspicion, stated publicly, by the sheriff whose office is handling the case. A sheriff can suspect. An autopsy decides. The public has not seen the document that would decide. Now hold that theory next to the documents. The family's independent autopsy, per ABC News and CNN, the one result the public has seen, returned undetermined pending investigation. The state autopsy, the document that could confirm that suspicion or change it, was completed by July 31st, per Walvo BT, and has not been made public. It is going to a grand jury. So the public holds a suspicion in one hand and undetermined in the other. And the document that could settle the difference sits inside a process the district attorney says she cannot open without stepping outside the bounds of the law. Here is what that process is. A grand jury is a group of citizens who hear evidence and decide whether the case supports charges. It is not a trial, it is a gate. The district attorney has said the grand jury is where this case is headed. Per Mississippi Public Broadcasting, the family's attorney says the review could come within 30 days, about a month before the evidence goes before citizens who are allowed to see what the public cannot. Until that happens, the record stays a hole, and a hole in a story this loud does not stay empty. Mississippi Public Safety Commissioner Sean Tyndall, per WellBT, says a purported toxicology report circulating on social media is fraudulent, not inaccurate. Not unverified, fraudulent. Someone manufactured a medical document and dropped it into the public conversation about Nolan Wells. The state had to step forward and call it fake. That is what the gap produces. When the record will not fill itself, the public fills it. Sometimes with a fake document, sometimes with something worse. The FBI is investigating threats. According to the Bureau, per Live Now from Fox, the threats are aimed at the people who were with Nolan Wells in the hours before he vanished, and at officials working the case. The people who were on that boat are not the subject of that investigation. The threats are, but the gap turned the public's attention toward the three friends. They became targets, and the public, with no official information, supplied its own story, a story that did not have to be true to be dangerous. And through all of it, the charge sheet has stayed empty. The three friends have never been named as suspects. The threats came anyway. So count what this gap has already generated. One sheriff's suspicion of drowning. One independent autopsy saying undetermined. One state autopsy the public cannot read. One fraudulent document. One federal investigation into threats. One family waiting for an answer. Every one of those traces back to the same silence in the timeline. That silence is now the specific thing the federal government has been asked to examine. Not the whole case, the gap. And here is the legal ground that request lands on. Per Newsweek and NOLA.com, the case remains under state jurisdiction through the Jackson County District Attorney. State jurisdiction, not federal. It is the district attorney's office that presents findings to a grand jury. The federal government has been asked in, the state is still the one holding the door. And the clock on that request is already running. Every party in this case has now said something about the gap, and the statements do not agree. Start with the person who holds the file. District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath. Her latest statement, per ABC News. She will present a thorough investigation to a grand jury. Not a summary, not a press release, a thorough investigation. And then she said what she will not do. She will not fill the void. Releasing information publicly, she said, would put her outside the bounds of the law. That is her position on the gap. The law will not let her speak into it. The public has been asking for answers. Her answer is that the law ties her hands. The grand jury will see the file. The public will not. The family answers through their attorney, Ben Crump. Per Mississippi Public Broadcasting, he says a grand jury review could come within 30 days. About a month from now. 30 days is an estimate, not a promise. It is the only timeline anyone has put on the grand jury review. It is the family's estimate of when the gap finally gets a hearing in front of citizens who can see the file. 30 days is a short time in a death investigation. It is a long time for a family waiting. The sheriff's read came first, and it is the oldest voice on the record. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter said there were no signs of foul play, per the sheriff's department. He suspected drowning. That was the first official answer to the question the gap asks. It said, the water did this. And it remains the only official read on the cause that has been released. The state autopsy sits between those two readings, completed by July 31st, per Wilt Bolt, not made public, going to the grand jury. So the one document that could settle the sheriff's suspicion against the family's own examination is the one document nobody outside the investigation can read. And now the federal level has spoken. The Congressional Black Caucus wrote to the Department of Justice, per ABC News and Mississippi Public Broadcasting, urging an independent federal review of the circumstances surrounding Nolan Wells' disappearance and death. They gave the department 7 days to respond. 7 days. The request is for the federal government to look at the same circumstances the state is examining, not instead of the state. On top of it, 7 days is the deadline, not a suggestion. The Justice Department answered. A spokesperson confirmed receipt of the letter and said appropriate personnel are reviewing it carefully. That is the spokesperson's own description, per the department's statement. Reviewing, not acting, not yet. That is the entire federal response so far. A receipt, a review. The department did not say yes. It did not say no. So line up the statements and you can hear the disagreement. The sheriff says drowning. The family's own examination did not agree. The district attorney says the grand jury will decide. The Justice Department says it is reviewing. We are counting 4 positions, 1 gap. And the statements do not fit together. Every official voice has now picked a position on the gap. Every one of them, except one. Count them. 4 statements, 1 silence. The president has said nothing. As of August 24th, the record contains no public statement from the president about this case. Not 1 word. The record has a hole where a presidential statement would be, and the letter asking the federal government to step in went to his Attorney General, Todd Blanche. The 7-day clock is already moving. So the question this case now asks is not whether the gap will be examined. It will be. The question is who gets to examine it first, the state's grand jury or the federal government the president controls. And while that question sits unanswered, Nolan Wells' mother is still waiting for the one statement that matters most, the one that says what happened to her son. The family's own attorney just put a number on the clock. Per Mississippi Public Broadcasting, a grand jury review could come within 30 days. Not a date, not a promise. A window, 30 days. And that window is the one place this case can actually close. Everything Nolan Wells' mother has been waiting to hear, the answer to what happened to her son, moves through that room. 30 days is the closest thing to a deadline this case has ever had. It is not much time for a case this size. The case stays under state jurisdiction, per Newsweek and NOLA. The Jackson County District Attorney's Office, presents its findings to a grand jury. That is the only door. The DA does not release the file to you, to us, to anyone. She hands it to a grand jury, and a grand jury decides what happens next. That room is closed. Grand jury proceedings are secret. You do not get to watch. Neither do we. The decision comes out. The reasoning does not. The district attorney has already told you what she will put in front of them, per ABC News. A thorough investigation. Her words. She has also told you what she will not do. She pushed back on public pressure to release information, saying she would be stepping outside the bounds of the law if she filled that void and shared anything publicly, per ABC News. That is the whole reason the silence exists. Not a cover-up, a statute. She cannot talk because the law will not let her talk. And so the only way any of us hears what is in that file is if the grand jury acts. So what is in that file? Start with scale. The sheriff's office says, investigators have interviewed more than 60 witnesses, perf looks. 60. That is not a quick look at a boat trip. That is a full investigation, documented, witness by witness. 60 people is a lot of interviews for one afternoon on one island. And the FBI is assisting with the digital evidence, because Horn Island sits on federal land, per the sheriff's office. Federal land changes who gets to look at what? It puts a federal agency inside a state case. The 3 friends who were on that boat have been interviewed. That is where the record stops on them, per CNN, NPR, and NOLA.com. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan Wells' death. Not one person. And then there is the document that could settle everything. The state autopsy. Completed July 31st, per WallBT. Still sealed, bound for the grand jury. Sheriff John Ledbetter said there were no signs of foul play, and that he suspected drowning, per the department. 2 readings already exist on this death, the sheriff's and the family's own examination. The state autopsy is the tiebreaker. It is the only official record of what killed Nolan Wells, and the public has not been allowed to see it. The grand jury will. We will not until they have decided. So, the grand jury is not just deciding charges, it is deciding which version of this death is true. A grand jury can indict. It can decline. It can close the case or send it back for more. The official timeline sits in that file too. 60 witnesses heard. Digital evidence in federal hands. One autopsy no one outside the room has seen. And a 30-day window before the family's attorney says the review could come. That is the entire case, compressed into one room, one decision. You can feel where this is headed. The district attorney has built her entire public position on one idea, that the law will not let her speak until the grand jury has spoken. So the grand jury is the moment the silence breaks. And when it does, everything she has been holding back finally gets a public answer. But the grand jury is not the only door. The federal review is a second door, and no one has said which one opens first. The Justice Department has 7 days. That is the clock. The Congressional Black Caucus said it, per ABC News and Mississippi Public Broadcasting, when it sent that letter urging an independent federal review. And the department has already answered. A spokesperson confirmed receipt, per the Justice Department, and said appropriate personnel are reviewing it carefully. Reviewing it carefully. That is the entire statement. Not yes, not no. A file on a desk. A review in motion. A clock still running. But here is the thing about desks. They hold more than one file. And right now, that desk is full. Because the Wells family's attorney, per Mississippi Public Broadcasting, says a grand jury review could come within 30 days. 30 days. That is the other clock. And it is the one that matters more. Because the district attorney, Angel Myers McElrath, has already told us what she will do with her file. She told ABC News she will present a thorough investigation to a grand jury. A thorough investigation, not a partial one, not a rushed one. Every interview, every test, every piece of evidence she has been legally barred from sharing with you, with me, with anyone, all of it goes into that room. All of it gets weighed in that room, and all of it stays in that room. And waiting for them is the state autopsy, completed July 31st, per WLPTA. Still sealed, still unpublished, still the only official record of what killed Nolan Wells. The grand jury will see it. The public will not until they decide. That is the law, that is the process, and that is the silence the district attorney has been holding. She cannot break it. She said so herself. She told ABC News that releasing information before the grand jury acts would put her outside the bounds of the law. So she sits on the file. The autopsy sits in the file. The 60-plus witness interviews sit in the file. The digital evidence the FBI helped examine sits in the file. And the grand jury is the only key that opens it. But here is what the grand jury will find when it opens that file. No one has been charged. That is the line. Not one person. The case remains under state jurisdiction, per Newsweek and NOLA.com. The sheriff, John Ledbetter, said there were no signs of foul play and that he suspected drowning. His department said so. That is on the record. But the family's own independent autopsy, per ABC News and CNN, came back with a cause and manner of death of undetermined pending investigation. Undetermined. Not accident. Not drowning. Undetermined. 2 readings. 2 different answers. 1 room. 1 decision. And the grand jury is not just deciding charges. It is deciding which version of this death is true. It can indict, it can decline, it can close the case or send it back for more. It can believe the sheriff, it can believe the family's examiners, it can find something no one else has found yet. That is the power of that room, and no one outside that room knows what will happen inside it. So which comes first? The 7-day federal answer, or the 30-day grand jury review? The Justice Department could step in tomorrow and change everything. A federal review could pull the case out of state hands. Or it could stay exactly where it is, under state jurisdiction, per Newsweek and NOLA.com. The DA, for her part, has pushed back against public pressure, per ABC News, saying she would be stepping outside the bounds of the law if she shared information publicly. She is boxed in, by her own account. The law will not let her speak, so she waits. The family waits. We all wait. But on August 31st, the waiting stops. Or it does not. That is the thing about deadlines. They come, they go, and sometimes they change everything. What does not change is this. Nolan Wells was 18 years old. He went to Horn Island on the 4th of July, and his body came back on the 6th. His mother, Christine Wansley, has been waiting since. Not for a conviction, not for a headline, for an answer. And when the grand jury finally speaks, she gets it. One way or another, the silence breaks. And the answer is hers. There is one more thing about that 30-day figure worth saying plainly, because it is the sort of number people repeat until it becomes a date. It came from the family's attorney, not from the district attorney's office and not from a court. Per Mississippi Public Broadcasting, a grand jury review could be within 30 days. Could be. No one has published a scheduled date, and grand jury calendars are not announced in advance. What the district attorney has now added is the shape of what she intends to present. A thorough investigation, put in front of a grand jury, per ABC News. Set that against the federal track, because the two do not wait for each other. The Congressional Black Caucus asked the Justice Department for an independent review with a 7-day clock. DOJ confirmed the letter arrived and said it is reviewing carefully. Nothing in that process pauses a Mississippi grand jury, and nothing a grand jury does closes the federal question. 2 tracks, 2 clocks, and only one of them has a number attached. A number that came from a lawyer rather than a calendar. No one has been charged in connection with Nolan Wells' death.